Hello and welcome to the Ruth MacFit podcast, where we're redefining what it means to feel great in midlife. My name is Ruth and I am coach and creator of the No Crap Cake Method, a simple, no nonsense approach to fat loss, fitness, and feeling your best without giving up everything you love. A quick note here as well. We are about to start our No Crap Summer Challenge. It starts on the 1st of July and it's all about building those habits that feel sustainable, that can actually keep you going over the summer. No extremes, just flexible routines that fit with your life. And right now, you can get 20% off your first month of membership. To join, you can find all of the information in the show notes. I'd absolutely love to have you with us. So if you're ready to ditch your all or nothing mindset, feel stronger in your 40s and beyond, and say no to all the crap that drains you, then you are absolutely in the right place. Let's go. Hello, welcome back. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Maybe you're sorting some washing, going out for a walk, or even just drinking a cup of tea. Anyway, I've been inspired to record this episode because of the fact there was a comment on a post that I shared on Instagram. And I thought, that needs to be mentioned because I wonder how many people are hearing this and feeling a bit rubbish. So the post that I shared was about one of my amazing clients who's actually had huge mindset shifts, but also has lost over 25 kilograms now. And she sent me a message with some of the beliefs that she'd had prior to starting with me versus now. So this is the one that I shared. I'm going to read it to you so you know what I'm talking about and you have the context. She said, I thought I was missing the secret to fat loss and I read hundreds of diet books. I was convinced I needed to cut out all of my favourite foods and eat differently to my family. But the secret I was missing was learning how to implement balance. And then she said, oh, hi, ice cream in the garden on a Wednesday just because it's sunny, which is amazing, by the way. And the reason that I love this is because I think a lot of us can feel like we're missing the secret to fat loss. I know that I felt like this back in the days when I was either on a diet or off a diet. I was thinking I was broken, that something was wrong with me. It would feel like I was doing everything right, that I'd be trying really hard, and then I'd get on the scales and nothing had changed. And I was constantly searching for information about what I was doing wrong and trying different things here and there. I had always been aware of my weight from childhood as I gained weight in that approach to puberty, but it wasn't really until having my first child that I really felt that I needed to go on a diet because I gained a fair amount of weight in pregnancy, which, just a side note, I used to say, I just naturally gained that weight. Nothing changed. Pretty sure it was to do with the cake. Actually, it's a great time eating cake in pregnancy. Anyway, there we go. So after pregnancy, I started trying to lose weight by tracking calories, aiming for a ridiculous 1,200 calories per day, and then going to the doctor because I wasn't losing weight and wondered if it could be my thyroid. And I remember him saying to me, well, you seem trustworthy as you're a teacher, so it's either your thyroid or you're lying. Now, he really did say that to me, and I felt confident, it's going to be my thyroid then. And guess what? Then my thyroid test came back clear and I felt so ashamed as I didn't think I was lying. I think in hindsight it was likely because I was expecting to lose weight in a few days and then I couldn't sustain that over a longer period of time. So anyway, I went on Slimming World after that. I did lose a bit of weight, but honestly, I feel like that likely confused me even more about fat loss. And then following that, I had to go at so many different things. I definitely fasted. I definitely tried paleo and tried other things in between. And I think we shouldn't forget that I likely also tried to outrun the food that I ate. Not a good tactic, which I will try and go into in a moment. I have to make a note to remember that. Anyway, when I posted that message as a reel, the comment that I got from a lady just said 2 words. It's a calorie deficit. And I think what she was implying is that there is no secret to fat loss. It's being in a calorie deficit. And she probably thought, oh my goodness, here's another coach who's saying you can eat whatever you want and making out that there's some secret other than being in a calorie deficit, which is missing the point, of course. But I'm so glad that she left that comment, as it means that I can address this with you, because it might be that you're hearing that message and wondering what's wrong with you, just like I used to wonder what was wrong with me. And I want to be clear that she's not wrong. that you do need to be in a calorie deficit. That is how fat loss is going to happen. Your body needs to use more energy than you're taking in over time to lose fat. That is the mechanism. But, and this is a very big but, if that were all that mattered, wouldn't we all just be walking around at our healthiest weight, feeling great, strong, amazing? It would be simple, wouldn't it? Because while the mechanism is simple, the method that we use really does matter at any time, I think, but particularly in midlife, because it's never just about a deficit, especially if you want to feel great as well. And I do wonder if this oversimplifying of fat loss is what's leading us to feel like we're broken, leading us to feel like we failed because we can't just do that one simple thing. I know that if I'd heard this all those years ago, I would definitely have felt like it was confirmation that there was something wrong with me and I was a broken one. So yes, if you're in a calorie deficit consistently, then you're going to lose fat. But most women I work with know that already. I knew that back then. And the lovely woman who lost 25 kilograms, she knew that when she was struggling with fat loss. The struggle isn't about knowing, it's about doing it. And even more than that, doing it in a way that works with life and not against it. I think that is a huge reason that women in midlife feel stuck. They've got hormonal changes, stress, poor sleep, busy lifestyles, meaning that achieving and sustaining a deficit can be incredibly difficult. And if the approach that we take is too rigid or too aggressive, then we don't stick with it. So when people reduce fat loss to just eat less, they are ignoring the much bigger picture. And I think if we're honest, it is a bit dismissive of the complexity that a midlife woman is dealing with. And if I look back on when I was struggling all those years ago, my eldest, by the way, is now 15 and a half, which is crazy. I would think that the reason I struggled was because I was expecting results too quickly. And I'd probably read somewhere that you should lose between 1 to 2 pounds per week. And it's very likely that if that didn't happen in the first few days, then I would think it wasn't working. Anyway, in perimenopause and menopause, our estrogen levels do decline. And this can lead to changes in how our bodies store fat, particularly around our middle. You might feel like you've rounded through the middle a little more. And I know that this can feel quite frustrating. And it's partly due to estrogen levels dropping, but it can also be due to things like loss of muscle mass and changes in our appetite as well. It can also be that this time in our lives can affect our insulin sensitivity. The drop in estrogen means our body can become less responsive to insulin, so glucose isn't moved into our cells as efficiently. But that's not the only reason. There are lifestyle factors that can play a big role here as well. So I don't want you listening to this podcast and thinking, right, that's it, I'm doomed. It's just a given. You have more control than you might believe. And we mustn't forget, I don't think, that during this time, recovery can also feel slower, stress can hit harder, as well as sleep perhaps being more disrupted as well. And these things, they don't just impact our energy, they can impact our appetite, mood, and the choices we're making with food. And I think this is a very good time to go into a little bit more detail about stress in particular. This is something I see a lot with women in midlife, and it's understandable, but I think we also underestimate the impact. I don't just mean how much stress affects our body, but also the pressure that we're putting on ourselves on a day-to-day basis. We expect so much and nothing less than perfection from ourselves. Cortisol, which is the main stress hormone, gets a bad rap, but it's incredibly important for helping us manage acute stress to tackle those short-term challenges, and we can be very grateful for that. The problem only really arises when it becomes chronic, long-term stress. That's the point where maybe we're feeling exhausted, low in energy, really moody, but we're not even noticing anymore. It's at that chronic level and we see it as normal. I've mentioned this in a podcast before, but I always notice that stress is starting to rise up when I'm getting irritated by the most normal, natural things. The dog wanting to be fed or wanting to go out in the garden, just things like that, which absolutely they should be able to do. So stress can be from things like work, from other people's expectations, maybe from looking after others, from not getting enough sleep, from drinking alcohol, from being ill, from under eating. And I'm going to put a caveat here. So overtraining it can come from, or more often it's not so much overtraining, it's more under recovering. And of course, the pressure that we put on ourselves. We might think that this pressure comes from other people, but I think we are our own worst critics. And I doubt we'd ever ever be as harsh on others as we are on ourselves. So when stress becomes chronic and it stays elevated for that long period of time, it can encourage fat storage, especially around the abdomen, around that middle. Thanks. It's also going to increase our cravings, especially for those high sugar, high fat foods. And that's where emotional eating or snacking comes in. Not because people are undisciplined or weak, but because their body is under constant pressure. And a little side note and observation that I see on emotional eating is often when we're feeling stressed, we put it down to just being emotional eating and lack of control, but we're also skipping meals and missing nutrients in our meals because we're so stressed and busy and we're living in that reaction mode. And then that leads to this overeating later in the day, which we then say is emotional eating. I worked with an amazing woman called Jodie, who when she started with me, she felt like emotional eating and constant snacking was just something she couldn't control. And she was beginning to doubt that she'd ever get control over it. But for those of you that want a little bit of hope, she sent me a message. So she worked with me a while back and she sent me a message after having finished working with me for a while. And she was saying, I now feel strong, fit, and finally in control around food. I can still enjoy life. I just don't feel like I'm ruled by it anymore. And she actually sent another message after her birthday and after a holiday saying that she no longer minded being in the photos, which I think is also incredible. And this change that she experienced and many other women are experiencing didn't come from more restriction. It came from understanding her body better, learning balance and reducing the all or nothing thinking. She didn't go into this thinking, I just need to be in a calorie deficit. There are some links to stress and reduction in muscle mass as well, which I believe is down to under eating and not eating enough of the nutrient-dense food, which would then help build and maintain muscle. Like I said, stress is going to definitely have us craving that higher sugar, higher fat and more calorie dense food. Even if you're within your calories, it's not going to be optimal for muscle growth. It really does become such a vicious cycle because we find it hard to stop. Our sleep is disrupted and the loop can continue, which is why prioritizing habits that have you feeling calmer and not trying to add in loads too soon is going to be key to change here. Fat loss feels easier when we feel calmer. And if your nervous system is constantly under pressure, then you're not going to find it easy to focus on fat loss. In theory, fat loss will still happen if you're in a calorie deficit, but the way it happens, how quickly it happens, and the changes you notice can vary, especially in midlife. When progress feels slow, the go-to thought is, well, I must need to just eat even less. But that can actually make things even harder and increase all the symptoms that you've been experiencing. The good news is that there are other ways to support fat loss that don't involve prioritizing only your calories. So if you want to help with this aspect of fat loss, then you want to include some things that are going to have you feeling calmer, have you feeling good. That might be reading or stretching or walking or breath work, or even those things that make you laugh, dancing around the kitchen, telling a silly joke, meeting a friend for coffee, whatever works for you. And you're also, of course, going to want to make sure that you're prioritizing sleep. And if you don't know how to do that, then I've got a sleep audit, which you can absolutely use to see the things that you're already doing and then a few things that you can focus on next. But some examples of things you might include or might choose to work on are avoiding screens the hour before bed, a regular wake and sleep time, and my favourite, an evening routine that has you winding down, feeling calm and in control, ready for the following day. I know that I grew up thinking that if I wanted to lose weight, then I had to do more cardio. Now, energy balance is obviously important, but that doesn't mean hammering cardio to the point that you feel under pressure, more stressed. It's something you have to do. And this approach can actually have you craving those fast fuel foods I mentioned earlier to get back in those extra calories you've burned. It's got a name in the running world known as the rungaries. And I definitely am prone to the rungaries if I've done a longer, more intense session. Really, we just want to be focusing on being generally active. That can be walking or just moving around during the day. And that's a great place to start. And if you are doing intense cardio, then do it because it makes you feel good. And eat enough to fuel those workouts. Don't see it as just to lose weight. Because constant cardio and not enough fuel and the pressure to perform because we have to is going to be putting our nervous system under even more pressure. And we want to calm this down and include some strength training is going to be a great bet as well. This will also help you preserve and improve that muscle mass, which we do want to happen at this stage of life. So it's a win-win. You'll feel good and you're going to gain some muscle. I think self-care is something that can really get neglected at this time. When we're feeling stressed, we stop looking after ourselves even more. For me, I notice that it's actually my skincare routine that starts to just drift away when I'm starting to feel a bit rubbish. I end up rushing that evening. So for me, when I notice that I'm feeling like that, then I make sure that I'm taking a bit more time for it. It does sound irrelevant to fat loss, but it shows an element of self-care and then feeds into the rest of my day, into my sleep and so on. It's often these little things that have us feeling good. And another big topic I want to talk about is the scarcity mindset. And it's a big one because when we're feeling overwhelmed, our brains become hyper vigilant about what we're not allowed to have. And that is the scarcity mindset. And it's one of the biggest drivers of binging and emotional eating and that feeling of being out of control around food. Scarcity mindset leads to all or nothing thinking. So if you're being good, in inverted commas, then you're feeling pretty miserable. And if you're being bad, you say stuff it and you go all in. And research actually found that even the perception of restriction reduces mental bandwidth and leads to impulsive decisions. I wonder if anyone listening can relate to that. Restrictive dieting has actually also been shown to increase cortisol and emotional activity around food. So going back to what we spoke about just now with stress. And again, I'm sure that this might feel familiar. There was actually a study that described something called ego depletion. I've spoken about decision fatigue before, and I know it's so important to take this into consideration. But the study showed that this decision fatigue can actually lead to poor self-control later in the day. And that brings me nicely on to my very next point. And that is the importance of structure and routine. It's why I talk about this all the time, about the evening routine, about creating systems and structures that have it feeling easier. It's why I did a podcast on this last week or the week before, because when we feel like we've got these habits and daily routines that we can just fall back on, everything else feels easier. When our meals feel reactive, chaotic, or we just skip them altogether, then you've definitely set yourself up for overeating or reactive choices later in the day. But when we have structured eating that's balanced and predictable, it lowers our stress and it supports our nervous system. I think people can kind of think that it will be really boring, but it might be that you change it up a bit. It might be that you eat differently at the weekend. I have very samey breakfasts every day of the week. Apart from at the weekend, I'll have something slightly different. I do try and think ahead about my lunches and what they're going to be for the week, just because it gives me less to think about during the time. Now, you don't need to do that, and it's not something you necessarily need to do long term. You might end up just having those routines in place that just feel very go-to. You just know you always have those things in, and the structure just becomes there. But I find it easier to prep some protein on a Sunday and get my breakfast ready, because then it's just one less thing to talk about. And you have different things that you might put on rotation. It just reduces that decision fatigue so much. And it creates like an anchor in your day that helps you feel more in control. Just that one less thing to think about. I shared a quote in that podcast that I did, and I'm going to share it again now because I think it's just one that's worth remembering or refreshing on. It was from Getting Things Done, I believe, a book called Getting Things Done. And it said, when freed from the remembering function, the mind is a fabulous mechanism to put on play. And I think we often feel like we've got so many other things going on in our head that it's just got no room to focus on what we want to have for dinner, or fat loss, or self-care, or what we can do for a break here and a break there. And that's why getting things out of our head and making as many decisions in advance before you get to that point is going to be key. Your studies have found that high protein breakfasts are going to reduce your cravings and snacking later in the day. And I 100% see that all the time with my clients and also myself. It's also been shown that irregular eating patterns and restriction led to disinhibited eating and loss of control. And you might feel that planning ahead is just one more thing to focus on, but it really is going to free up so much more space so that you can focus on what's really important. See it as an expansion of the no crap cake method, whereas you're ditching the crap decisions so that you get more room to think about the things that are important for you. And now I want to be clear about something else. A deficit for you might not actually be the goal. You might think that you need to be in a calorie deficit, but there's something that I think doesn't get talked about quite enough. I did talk about it in a maintenance podcast recently, but I'm going to chat about it again here. Just because you carry some body fat or you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that you need to be in a calorie deficit necessarily. It could be that you're already at the lower end of a healthy weight and that chasing more fat loss might leave you feeling tired, weaker, hungrier, and still not liking what you see in the mirror. And this is where body composition comes in. And I've had this conversation with so many women in the past. You might just need to gain or maintain some muscle while also just losing a little bit of fat, or even just reshaping how your body feels and performs. And this is known as recomposition. And it can often be achieved just by focusing on what you're eating, prioritizing protein, lifting weights, and eating enough to support recovery. And again, studies show that resistance training and high protein diet leads to fat loss and muscle gain, even when the deficit is very modest. So the goal isn't always less weight. Sometimes it's more strength, more energy, more confident, and it's worth thinking about that before you embark on another diet. So here's what we focus on inside the no crap cake method, because it's not just about eating less. Yes, fat loss requires a calorie deficit, but in midlife, how we approach that deficit is going to make all the difference. So inside the no crap cake method, we don't focus on extremes, we focus on a calorie range, not a fixed number, so that you have the flexibility built in for life's ups and downs. Some days you'll hit the lower end, ideal for fat loss, and other days you might be closer to maintenance, and that is fine. It's the weekly average that counts without big extremes, and there's no guilt and no need to give up. We also focus on habits and not perfection with those. We look at protein, fiber, and meal structure to reduce snacking and cravings, as I mentioned earlier. We focus on trying to fit in strength training wherever it fits in your life, from daily routines to the longer workouts, to movements you enjoy that don't feel punishing, to calm, sleep, protecting our nervous system, because fat loss is easier when you're not feeling overwhelmed. Mindset shifts that ditch the all or nothing thinking can actually help you stick with it. And that is the goal, progress that fits your life and doesn't take over it. Your life is not going to stop for fat loss, and it shouldn't need to. I say that again and again. So this is about ditching the crap, the pressure, and those unrealistic rules that you might have been following, the shame, and that will give us more freedom and flexibility to say yes to the things that matter to you. So if this episode resonated with you, then of course I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please review this podcast. Please comment on this episode. Please share with any friends that you feel need to hear these messages, and come and find me on Instagram at RuthMacFit, and feel free to ask me any questions there, because I love hearing from women in midlife and always happy to help where I can. You can also check out my website, www.ruthmacfit.com, for more information on coaching options. Until next time, goodbye.